Hello and good evening. You're very welcome to the second in our series of Rhododendron Week live talks with the National Botanic Gardens at Kilmacurragh. So I'm very pleased tonight to introduce our speaker, Richard Baines. And the topic, as you can see there, is the propagation and cultivation of rhododendrons. So this is a practical element in our series. So I know there'll be some very good questions coming along down the line, and we're looking forward to getting around to those at the end of the talk. But in the meantime, Richard will speak for about 40 minutes or so. And yeah, so just to say, my name is Charlotte, by the way. I work at the National Botanic Gardens in Glasnevin. Richard Baines is a curator of Logan Botanic Gardens in Scotland. So it is a satellite garden of the main Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. So in many ways, it's a parallel, I suppose, of our botanic gardens in Kilmacurragh. So also, of course, the climate is comparable. So Richard will be talking, I'm sure, about the climate and for context when he's talking about propagation and cultivation. So he's been the curator at Logan Botanic Gardens since 2007. He's also a trustee of the Galloway Gardens. And prior to that, he has lots of experience. He worked in various places during his training as well. I see that he worked in the Longwood Gardens in America, which is interesting. And he also worked with Kew Gardens at Wakehurst. And he's been involved with different plants, but his main interest tonight, of course, is rhododendrons. And he's a member, of course, of the Scottish Rhododendron Society and the Rhododendron Species Association as well. So he's very much involved in the world of rhododendrons. So basically no better person to explain to us the intricacies of propagating and cultivating a very wide variety of rhododendrons. And his most recent publication is Plant Explorer, a Plantman's Travels in Northern Vietnam. So there will be reference to some of these Vietnamese species tonight. And I know there could be more work in the pipeline on the subject of rhododendrons and Vietnam as well. So just to let you know as well, of course, you've already seen there, we have a chat box, as we call it there, on the side where you can introduce yourselves and say hello. And we already see we have a great variety of people from around the world, really. Holland, Nova Scotia, and of course, Scotland and Ireland. And we're looking forward to hearing more from you. And you can talk away there. And Ciara Travers, my colleague at the Botanic Gardens in Glasnevin, is there, and she'll kind of help you along if you have any issues, such as, if there's any technical issue, or if you want to get a link to something to do with Rhododendron Week or the gardens. And just to say, if you have a particular question for Richard, please enter it into the Ask a Question box on the bottom of your screen there. And we will get around to those at the end of the talk. You can also upvote questions. So if you see a question that you like, give it a vote and it'll push it up the queue. So we'll start with the most popular question and we'll work our way through. And there's a poll there as well. So you can see now, Richard is interested to see, what you know about some of those rhododendrons. So have a go and we'll give you the answer later on. And we'll tell you exactly why this particular rhododendron is the odd one out. So it's quite an interesting one. And yeah, again, just to mention that we will hopefully hear from Seamus O'Brien at Kilmacurragh, the head gardener there at the end. And we're looking forward to that little bit of a panel discussion at the end of the talk. But now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Richard Baines with his presentation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Charlotte, for the introduction there. And we'll just get the slideshow going. That's great. So tonight I'm going to be talking about the propagation and cultivation of rhododendrons across the whole genus. It's a very large genus. There's probably about 1,200 different species or thereabouts, many different subsections, each of them very different. Some are epiphytic, some terrestrial, a lot of them very different in their propagation requirements. So let's have a look at one or two things. So, when we talk about rhododendrons, many of us have a lot of challenges in our lives, and then we become and develop an interest in rhododendrons. Rhododendrons, a lot of them are quite difficult to grow. Many of them, for example, you see there in the top left-hand side, are epiphytic. They won't grow in the ground. They require very good drainage. They'll often grow in the crevices of trees, such as Rhododendron Dendrocaris in Sichuan. Here, but on the top left-hand side, you see them growing at Logan epiphytically on the Dixonian Antarctica logs. Bottom left, here we see Rhododendron Genosturianum. The challenge with this one here is it comes into growth very, very early, so it's often frosted, and we've all seen in the last couple of weeks how many frosts and how severe the frosts have been. I'm pleased to say I was having a look at the growth on this one yesterday, and it's okay. And Rhododendron Genosturianum is very different to almost any other rhododendron. And in the bottom left there, you'll see very unusual flowers on it. It has amazing bark, comes into growth very, very early, and then has these very un-rhododendron-like leaves. So early growth, top right-hand side there, Rhododendron Nuttallii. This is one of the real gems of the genus. It has one of the largest flowers. It has amazing growth. It's a beautiful habit and a nice bark as well. Rhododendron Nuttallii, the drawback with that is that it isn't very hardy. It's from southern China and northern Vietnam. But I should say that some of the recent introductions from northern Vietnam have come through, certainly came through with flying colours. This year we had -6 at Logan. It's come through with flying colours, and it's actually come through -9. So it's certainly challenging, but it's certainly possible. And probably, in my opinion, certainly to date, from my experience, probably the most challenging of all rhododendrons, Rhododendron Crenulatum from northern Vietnam, from the fancy pan where it grows on a summit, along with other rhododendrons such as Rhododendron Sinofalconeri. It doesn't like it too cold. It likes really good light. It likes it well drained, but it likes it acidic, and it almost grows in pure peat.
Richard, I'm very, very sorry to cut across you there. Just to let you know that we can just see the first slide at the moment. So you need to, you're moving through the PowerPoint, are you?
Yeah, I'm just on the second slide.
Okay, unfortunately, it's not showing here.
Okay.
So bear with me one moment and we'll address that, no problem.
Sure. Do you want me to stop sharing and try again, or?
Yeah, maybe try that if that's all right with you. Thanks so much. Sorry
So,
about that.
it's fine. Yeah, I'll stop sharing.
Great. Okay, so we'll go share screen and
okay.
And application window.
Share screen. Application window.
Great, we can see that better. And if you go, you know, to make it the full screen from current slide or from beginning, if you like, yeah, perfect.
So that should be the second slide.
Yes, and could you make it full screen? It's not full screen for some reason.
Yeah, it should be full screen.
Okay.
On my screen, it's certainly full screen.
Okay, just a second. Sorry about this.
So it's fine. Yep.
Application. Okay. Just getting a message here from Lynn, who's a great person with the tech. Right. Okay, so you need to share the other window.
Hold on.
Oh no, it's zoomed in a bit there. Hang on.
Oh, hold on. Let me get out of there. Screen sharing. Do you want me to stop sharing and try again?
Yeah, maybe one more time. Thank you.
Okay, so above me, I'm sharing screen, application window.
And click on the PowerPoint.
Now it's coming back with that rhododendron window, which we've had the problem just before.
Okay.
So let me cancel that.
No problem.
I'll minimize this and I'll put the other one on, and then I'll publish that.
Great.
Can you see anything then now?
Just a second, not yet. So if you have the presentation open in the background.
Yeah, I've got it open.
Sort of behind this crowdcast.
Okay.
Then
So let me go to Crowdcast and then share screen.
Yeah.
Let's try that. Application window. Yep. Share. So it should be on now.
Great. And if you try full from the beginning, I suppose.
Yeah, I'll try again.
Yeah.
So that's me from beginning now. So that should be on slide number 2.
It's not.
Is it not?
It's still on the first one.
I wonder why it's not moving on.
Just bear with me one moment.
Sure.
I'm just going to mute my mic just while I check something, and I'll be
Sure.
right back. Thanks so much.
No, it's fine.
Hello again, Richard.
Hello again.
Hiya, I just checked in there with Glyn. So if you you have it open there, if you just close it one more time.
Yep.
Thank you. Stop screen share, in other words, and have the.
So stop sharing.
Yeah.
Yep.
And just have your PowerPoint open. And if you go to, if you start from the, if you have it open there and you come back to share screen.
Share screen. Hold on.
Yeah, no problem. And
so share screen. Yep.
And when you look at that, hopefully you see.
Yep.
Application window and click on the PowerPoint itself.
Yep. And share it.
Yeah, try that.
Yep. So that's. Yeah, and it says stop sharing.
Let's see.
I think it's froze.
Yeah, no, it's doing the same thing, unfortunately.
Do you want me to try and go out and come in again? Or
let me think. Yes.
Right, I'll try and come out and go in again. This time minimize that. And then okay, propagation, okay. And then
so you need to run the presentation from the beginning and then share it. So if you click from beginning on your PowerPoint.
Yep.
And then come back to the Crowdcast and click on share.
Screen, application window.
Are you using 2 screens or is it one?
One screen,
yeah. No problem. Yeah.
So yeah, that's it up on the screen, and then it says stop sharing, etc. If that's.
Oh, it's still not doing it right.
Yeah.
So, oh yeah, well we can see the second slide, and it isn't full screen, but we can see it.
Is it not? Yeah. Do you want me to? Let me try from beginning. Hold on. Let me just try it. See if it.
So.
Can you see that?
No. So I think apparently you have to click from beginning before we share it. So maybe.
Okay. No, it's okay. So from beginning before we share it. So how would I actually? Oh right. Okay. Hold on.
Stop sharing one more time, and then we'll go to share screen on the Crowdcast again.
The problem is that this is.
Sorry, apologies. Yeah.
The problem is this is taking a full screen, and I have to press escape, to get the actual thing, to get the actual icon. That's my problem.
Okay, I understand that.
But it did work okay. It has worked okay every time I've used When we used it the other day, for example.
Yeah, I know.
That's a strange.
Try clicking on the second slide again. Just to
Yep.
see.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Second slide. And it does say stop sharing.
We can see the second slide.
And there's the third slide.
Yeah, we can see it. It's just a little bit smaller.
Yeah, I mean, if it makes it so it's possible, I mean, I can go through it manually without, putting it on the slideshow. It's just going to be a bit smaller. That's the only thing, but it might be better than nothing.
Oh, I see a message there. From a viewer slide. If you click on the square in the bottom right hand corner, it expands the screen. Try that.
Which
bottom
one?
Right hand corner. The very bottom.
Oh, yep. Okay. Yeah, pressed it. Yep. I mean, I can make it a bit bigger. That's a little bit bigger, but I've got it, actually fit slide to current window which I've pressed.
Yes. What do we think?
I mean, I can continue and just go through manually if you want, just talking my way through it, rather than a slideshow and just going through slide. But some of the text will be quite small. That's the thing.
I know.
I don't know why it's not actually working from beginning.
I know.
I don't understand.
Terribly sorry about that.
Oh no, it's not your fault at all. No, let me try again. Let me just one more time.
Okay, if we can make the screen look bigger on our side, apparently. So
Okay.
what you're doing, yeah, we can make it larger on our viewer.
Okay.
That's what we'll do.
That's great. Yeah, that'll be good.
So if you want to proceed, I'm terribly sorry about that delay, everybody. I think we can make it bigger on our screen, so we can see it small, but then we can make it large. So we're with you anyway. We're on the right slides. That's the main thing.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Charlotte.
Thank you so much for bearing with us, everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much. We'll continue. Unfortunately, the slides will be a little bit smaller, but we'll hopefully get the gist of things. So I was just mentioning there that the bottom right-hand side, Rhododendron Crenulatum, which is probably the most challenging of any rhododendron species, I think, to grow. It requires full light, well-drained soil, plenty of moisture, 100% humidity when possible. So it's a real challenge, like the other species which are in the rest of the slides. So tonight I'm going to talk about a few different methods of propagation, seed propagation, layering, and cuttings. So let's have a look at seed propagation for a start. So when you're collecting seeds, possibly you might be ordering your seeds up from different societies, such as the Rhododendron Species Foundation in America, Rhododendron Camellia and Magnolia Group, or the Scottish Rhododendron Society. They usually produce seed lists around Christmas time and have an excellent list where you can you can actually source the material. Unfortunately, now since the Nagoya Protocol, it's not possible to get seed which is wild collected, so it has to be collected. And the one thing you should always go for when you are collecting, getting seed, is to ensure that it's hand pollinated and not open pollinated, because unfortunately rhododendrons are very promiscuous, and unless there's only one rhododendron out in your garden, for example maybe Rhododendron auriculatum, which flowers in August, you'll get a whole different collection of different hybrids. So normally, as I say, the seed, if you're collecting it yourself, you normally collect it in November, December time. Choose a nice dry day, store the seed, collect the seed in a nice cotton bag. And then the best way to get the actual capsules to open is to put them on a tin, on the lid of a tin, and put them on top of a radiator. And over the course of 2 or 3 days, the capsules will open, and all this lovely rhododendron seed will be available for you to put in a packet. And the best way, once you've collected it, is to sieve it, get the seeds to go through the sieve, and then get your seed, put it in some nice foil and store it roughly about 3 degrees in the fridge. So with seed, it should normally be sown ideally in December. I usually try and sow mine between sort of Christmas and New Year, but anytime up till March. As I say, store it to about 3 degrees. Once it's sown, it greatly benefits, because we have such short days in the likes of Scotland, from having additional lighting up to 16 hours a day is very beneficial. Why do you sow it so early? Well, because you're wanting to basically get a good sized plant before winter, so it will come through. And this is especially important with deciduous subjects, especially the likes of deciduous azaleas. If you don't get them up to a reasonable size, they'll die back and won't come through the winter. And also, if you sow the seed nice and early, you can get your seedlings a reasonable size before the scattered fly starts to hatch. So avoiding scattered fly and liverworts as well. So the seed is normally sown in 9cm pots and covered over with a plastic bag, and the bag is kept on until after germination. What compost you use? This is very much a personal thing, but if I was sowing rhododendron seed, roughly 65% peat, 25% composted bark, and 10% perlite. And you get a better mix if you put the peat through a 100mm sieve prior to making up the actual mixture itself. Once you've actually made up your pot and your mixture, put an application of myricid on, which is a very weak fertilizer, ideally for ericaceous plants. No other fertilizers should be used at this stage. And you get your compost in your pot, level it off, and give it a light firming. You don't firm it too heavily, because else it becomes quite solid and it impedes drainage. And with rhododendron seeds, they're always sown on the surface and never covered over. So that's very important. And one of the most important things as well for seed propagation is that we keep them nice and moist. If they don't, if the humidity reduces in any way, they'll get very dry and dry up very quickly. Rhododendron seed should always ideally be sown fresh and can be kept up to about 3 years. And the fresher you can get it, the easier it is to germinate. And rhododendron seed, if you have fresh seed, should germinate like mustard and cress. Ideally, sow it nice and thinly and evenly. Now, a mistake that quite a few people make is that they get the seed packet and they pour it onto the hand, and they put the hand, they get the seed from the hand and put it onto a surface. I feel quite strongly your seeds should never go in your hand. If you just get your seed packet and tap your first finger onto the seed packet and put it onto the top of the pot, so that your seed comes out nice and evenly. And this way, if you're sowing a few seeds, your seed, which is very, very fine, won't get onto your hands and won't get mixed up. And as the seed is so small, you've got to be quite careful that there's no drafts, because it'll blow. It's very fine. It's almost like the spores of ferns. You don't need to sow all the seed. If you don't use all the seed, put it back, ideally in the alcan foil, and put it back in the fridge and store it at 3 degrees. And if you can get one of these airtight containers, the seed will actually respire even less, and your seed will last longer. Once the actual seeds are sown, again, just put use a very fine rose and a weak application of myricid. And what the watering does, it settles the seeds and drives the seeds into cellular spaces. Once sown, the trays or pots are now labelled with a date. 3 things you need. You need a date, a collection number or an accession number, and a name. That's very important. And I always get into the habit of actually having a unique accession number or a collection number for each particular species. You might, for example, be sowing Leptocladon, Rhododendron Leptocladon, for example, and they might be collected at 2 different altitudes. And when it first flowers, maybe 5 years later, when you come back, you can then trace what the origin of the plant was through the unique accession number. So on top of each of the pots, they are now placed on top so plastic bags are actually placed on top of them, and then they're placed in an environment, ideally of 21 degrees centigrade. The easiest way to heat the pots is using underground heating, using a soil warming cable. And what I think is a good practice as well is to actually water the greenhouse floor twice a day, just to keep up the relative humidity. I'm a firm believer in old traditions, in that you should fill your can up the day before, leave it in the greenhouse overnight to acclimatise to the ambient temperature and get tepid water. You can use a slightly lower temperature, but your germination will take a little bit longer. And here we see a picture of all the pots, which are all covered over with plastic bags, and you see the 100% relative humidity. You just got to watch when the pots, when the plastic is covering a pot, that the pot ideally doesn't come into contact with the seeds, because the seeds will stick to the polythene and will germinate under polythene. So just to keep an eye out for that. Germination time varies according to the different species. Fortunei subsection are generally the fastest. They normally take about 14 days, while some other ones like Melotum and Flunkii can often take up to a month. Generally, the older the seed, the longer it will take to germinate. Once you've sown your seed, the bag will keep it nice and humid. And if for whatever reason, which is probably likely, if the seed takes a few weeks to germinate, probably maybe 3 to 4 weeks for most of the material, it's better to use boiled water. And if you are using boiled water, because it will stop the likes of mosses and liverworts, if you actually use it and water it from underneath using capillary action and immerse the pot in a pot or a bucket, it's a much better way to water it. Labeling, as I mentioned, make sure you have the name, the collection number or the accession number, and the date when it is sown. Very important. And just a hint, you should always work from left to right, because if for whatever reason your label rubs off, it's a lot easier to recognize a plant from the first 3 letters than the last 3 letters. If the compost does dry out from below, as I mentioned, water by capillary action, and after sort of 3 to 4 weeks, you should starting to see fairly good germination. Now at this time here, you'll find that probably once you start taking off your bags, you see 1 or 2 very fine flies, which appear to be a little bit like midges, which are very disheartening because they are on the surface and they lay their eggs and produce the larvae which feed on the rhododendron seedlings. Probably the easiest way to keep them under control is to have one of those sticky fly papers, which catches a lot of them. And my good friend Colin Crosby told me that you can use fly spray, and that's very good. I haven't used it myself, but that's what he uses. Chemical control is also available. And if you use, for example, once you do get eventually potting them all up, etc., Levington's introduced in 1998 Intercept to control both scarlet fly and vine weevils. And you can also get nematodes as well if you want to do it more organically. So once the covers are removed, we start doing overhead watering, and this should always water your seedlings first thing in the morning, so that they're dry by the time night comes and it's a bit cooler, else you'll get botrytis. And the thicker you sow your seeds, the more botrytis you'll get. You want to water them using a weak fertilizer, roughly once a fortnight. And again, Mirasid is ideal for that. The seedlings are generally pricked out once the first true leaves come along. Now this is quite a tricky process, and we'll have a look at some of these. So these were little seedlings which were pricked out, and this is probably about a month after they've been pricked out and growing away quite nicely. But we'll have a look at 1 or 2 pictures of those just shortly when they've been pricked out. Seedlings generally pricked out if you're using trays, usually in 9x5s. That's a standard tray. Cellular trays are also very good, as this avoids root disturbance. You can use fertilizers on most of your seedlings to encourage them, but just be aware but Thomsonia and Thaliensis seedlings hate any fertilizer applications. So you've got to, I'd probably avoid giving those any liquid feeds. So when you first prick them out, again, just keep the seedlings at 17 to 21 ideally, but then you can actually reduce the temperature down somewhat. So here we see some of the seedlings being pricked out. Sometimes, ideally the seedlings should be pricked out individually, but sometimes they're very small and it probably do more damage. So just prick them out into clusters, a little bit like you do lobelia, and then you can prick them out individually the following year. And again, what does it look like when they're all pricked out? Again, you can see a little bit of moss starting to form on the surface there, which is very normal. But little seedlings pricked out into trays. And this is the actual pricking out process, individual seedlings. When you're handling the seedlings, always handle them by the leaves, never handle them by the stems. And that's because if you damage the leaf will die away and regrow again. But if you damage the stem, that's it for good. So it's quite a delicate operation. And, just try and do it out of full sun and a little bit of shade. And here we see newly pricked out seedlings. These maybe look like Rhododendron leptocladon, probably from Vietnam. And again, just other ones. But it's just as you just prick them out as you would any other seedling. These ones here were just pricked out into clusters, as you can see, because they were so small. These were seedlings which were pricked out last year. I took this photograph this last week, and so these will be pricked out individually, probably into individual pots actually now this coming week. When they're in the greenhouse, if you've got a particularly hot spell of weather, we always find it's better to put some nettle on just to provide additional shading. And sometimes you can provide, the likes of, if you don't have any nettle on, some newspaper and keep it, moist with a watering can going over it 2 or 3 times a day. But they hate being in full sun. They will very, very quickly burn off. So ideally, a north-facing frame or a frame inside a glass house with some nettle on. And once the seedlings start to grow on, here we see Rhododendron probably saxicolum, and on the right-hand side Facetum, some seedlings from last year. So once they've actually been pricked on, they grow quite quickly, some of the azaleas and trifloras grow quite quickly, and you can actually, once they've been pricked out into trays, you can actually go ahead and prick them into 7 or 9 centimetre pots. But when you're pricking them out, it's quite a personal choice whether you actually go for a square pot, a round pot, or even an air pot. You've got a few choices there. But certainly one of the most important things is that from late September, you stop all liquid feeding because the plants need to harden up for winter. They can make, a good lot of growth before winter, a lot of the trifloras, and sometimes you actually need to pinch them out to get nice bushy plants. Some subsections, like for example Grandia and Falconera, just produce single stems and are much slower growing. Grandia and Falconera can take up to 10-15 years to flower. That's not unusual. So some will flower a lot earlier than others. Some of your dwarf medenias and azaleas will certainly flower after 3 years. Growing on a young plant, so here we see a range of young plants which are just growing on. They grow on quite quickly, and some of these certainly need pinching out. This was a young plant of Rhododendron excellens or nuttali. I'm not actually quite sure, it might be a hybrid between them both, but that's a young plant of that one. And other young plants here of some Edgeworthias in there, but young plants just being grown on. In the glass houses and in the frames, this was last summer at Logan, just growing on, good big batches. At Logan, because we're growing plants for conservation reasons, it's really important that if we're growing a plant, rather than growing on 2 or 3 plants, we really should be growing on, 40 or 50 plants, to have, as much genetic diversity there as possible. Now that, has challenges, so we've opened up quite a few new areas in the garden to enable us to plant, bigger numbers. And on a similar basis to what we're doing with the conifer conservation project, we're hoping to use 1 or 2 safe sites where we can plant, for example, there at the bottom, Rhododendron excellence, like the Galloway House Gardens, where we've got a memorandum of understanding. They've got loads of land. We could probably plant 30 or 40 of those, which is, the right way, to carry out a conservation project rather than 2s or 3s. Here we see a batch of Rhododendron Sinofalconeri from northern Vietnam growing on quite nicely. And just a close-up. So these will be planted. We've planted out a lot of these this last year. So I guess you've got to decide, what kind of pot you want to use. Air pots are a bit more expensive. They come flat packed. You use this little turnkey on the left-hand side there. So one of the differences between air pots and normal pots is, in my opinion, air pots produce a better root system. At each of the holes are sort of nodule forms, and once these plants are planted out into situ, they tend to grow way better, but they are more expensive. So you've got to weigh it up essentially. So that's a little bit about seed propagation. We'll now move on to cuttings. There's loads of different methods of different types of cuttings which you can take in different times of the year. So we're going to go through the main seasons and times to take cuttings. I was always traditionally brought up doing rhododendron cuttings with a mist system, but you don't need a mist system at all. Just use polythene, and as long as you've got soil warming cables, you can almost root anything. But you do need high humidity, that's the key. So, as I say, traditionally it was always using an artificial leaf and misting, but the compost is very important. Some species will probably root after about 3 months, whereas other ones can take up to about 9 months to root. So for compost, at Logan we use medium grade peat, composted bark, perlite, a little bit of slow release fertilizer. We either use seed trays or an open bench, and if you're using seed trays, lattice bottoms are particularly good because they're so well drained, and the temperature is pretty crucial, ideally 17 to 21 degrees C. Boxes of cuttings are placed on top of the soil warming cables. Earliest cuttings are generally taken about July time, end of June, July, for deciduous azaleas. You take the cuttings from shoots which are slightly less than half ripe and growing away strongly. Always take your cuttings early in the morning, place them in poly bags so they keep the cells nice and turgid. And then they are often, what is found actually to be beneficial with deciduous azaleas is if you can actually keep the cuttings in a polythene bag in 24 hours before inserting them. This seems to help their rooting percentages. So we're making up the cuttings of deciduous azaleas, remove the tip and a bit of the soft growth, and then dress the heel and make a nice cutting of about 6 to 10 centimeters. Reduce some of the leaves to about 1/3 of the size. That's quite important. And generally, if you reduce the size, they won't wilt as much. One of the biggest failures, I guess, is the plants drying out and collapsing. So the key here is to get the cells nice and turgid, take your cuttings early in the morning, and try and really maintain that 100% humidity. Sometimes they do fail, and sometimes one of the real key to successes with taking cuttings is getting the timing right. And sometimes you can have, do everything right, but it's just too soft. And you should take your cuttings just when the actual base of a cutting is just starting to go brown. But it just comes with experience, just to getting the ideal time. And the base of a cutting should be slightly wounded, and then treated with a hormone rooting powder, such as free andyl butyric acid. The next batch of cuttings is generally taken in midsummer. This is your main batch. Things like Trichostomum fastigiatum, primulifolium, and these are taken and inserted into modular trays. So about the timing of those is June and July. We use a slightly different compost for those. 2 pots of peat, 1 pot of fine grade bark, a light watering of myricid. You don't actually need to wound those or use hormone rooting powder, and you don't remove the tips. And those are fairly easy to root, those ones there. Cuttings of a larger species, like the larger Irrata, Medina maculata, pontica, are taken slightly later in July. You generally, again, leave the bud in, unless there's a flower bud developing, and remove all the leaves except 4 and reduce those by half. We again, with these, do a slight cutting on the cambium layer to induce callus material to form. And on some species which have heavy endomentum, such as Rhododendron beruvii, when you're actually wounding a stem, remove the endomentum as well, just to encourage callus tissue to form. Then in late summer, taken in July, August, slightly larger species, Dichroanthum, are generally taken. We use the same compost as the midsummer cuttings. These are generally inserted, and then generally these are potted in spring, and you can always tell when they're rooted when they start to grow away again. Winter cuttings, these are taken in mid-January, and recent experiments have demonstrated that this is an excellent time to take larger leaf species. So even some of the very large leaf ones have been found you can actually root them. But I've been doing quite a lot of work doing winter cuttings in December, January, and I've had a very high success rate, and I strongly recommend people to do cuttings during this winter period. Similar technique and a similar compost, use hormone rooting powder, but some excellent results with very high percentage rooting rates taken during December and January. So moving on to layering. The key to layering is that you get very little failure, but the key to it is that you need to have access to the plant. So it has to be either in your own garden or in someone else's garden, and you can go back to it later on. There's 2 types of layering which I'm going to cover: simple layering or air layering. Simple layering, by far the easiest method. Basically, the limiting factor with simple layering is that you need a branch or a twig which is located close to the ground so it can be pegged down. Typically, if you can get a peg or a stone, set it on top of a branch after it's been wounded with a knife to expose the cambium layer. Basically, it should take roughly about a year. And, even if it doesn't root, you haven't actually lost anything. But, for a lot of rhododendrons, this is an ideal way. You wound it, you cover it in a little bit of leaf mold, and a year later, you go back, you sever the plant from the parent plant, and then I'd encourage you to probably line it out for a year and then plant it in the garden thereafter. So a lot of rhododendrons which are very upright, things like Rhododendron grande, falconeri, all these different plants, you can't really, it's quite difficult to do air layering a lot of the time because there are no branches down near ground level. So we use a practice called air layering. And with air layering, we choose a spot, part of the stem where you want the roots to grow. We make an upward cut with a knife, approximately a third of the way through, and we place a match inside the cut. And then you get a good ball of very moist sphagnum moss and tie it on both sides. You wrap the sphagnum moss round where you made the cut, a good 10 to 15 centimeters on either side. Make a good ball, wrap it on both sides, wrap it right way around with plastic, tie it on both sides, just as if you were tying a Christmas cracker, and that should keep nice and humid, and the wound can't easily heal. And again, like simple layering, it roughly takes a year to produce the roots, and you get a lovely plant at the end of it. So that's the technique of layering, which is another option. Growing on the plants. Once you've grown on the plants, most rhododendrons tend to grow better in subdued light, ideally in a north-facing frame, or with some netlon overhead. That's very useful. But once you're growing on your plants, you can lower the temperature. That's the key thing, to wean your plants off. So once you've got nice young plants, either of seedlings or of plants which are grown from cuttings, I'm a great advocate in the best grown plants are ones which are lined out. And here you can see in my own garden on the left hand side, I think these are probably rhododendron, Arizellums or Suloenenses there, I think, as well. Or in a frame, for example, on the right hand side, there's a nice Rhododendron Genosturianum at the back. So line them out and they get much better root systems than growing in pots. So a few tips. Getting the right material is absolutely imperative. Always try and get it from the north facing side of a plant, non-flowering shoots and very vigorous shoots. Timing is very important, and that kind of comes with experience. You can look at a plant. The first ones should be green at the bottom, your softwood ones, just starting, just the faintest sliver of brown, and then your next ones, you should start to see the lignin forming and the plant cutting starting to firm up. So timing is very important. The final little tip there, always keep a record of your treatment and the timing of your cuttings. It's amazing how easy it is to forget when you took your cuttings. So we're going to have look at one or two photographs now of rhododendrons. And these are ones which we've done at Logan in recent years. So this is one of the rarest rhododendrons. This is Rhododendron Camellia, which comes from a Pesci River, or which did come from the Pesci River in northern Taiwan. It's now extinct in the wild, and during the audit carried out by the carried out recently in relation to the Rhododendron Consortium, it was found that the only two plants of this actually still remaining were both at Logan. So we've propagated this plant here and now have distributed it to other gardens. But one of the key things with this plant here, the genetic makeup of this plant is very, very limited because of only these two plants, which are from exactly the same source. So when you're choosing which method to use, be it layering, cutting, seed, etc., if at all possible, and you're trying to conserve a plant, you want to use seed because you'll have much greater genetic diversity. This is a very typical border at Logan for any of you who have been to Logan, and it'll probably look like this in a couple of weeks. If you're growing rhododendrons, try and grow rhododendrons which do well in your climate. We're very fortunate at Logan, a little bit like Kilmacurragh, where we've got a very soft climate, and things like Edgeworthia, Medinias all do very well. So try to grow ones which do well in your climate. One of those ones is Rhododendron Edgeworthii, which is native to Burma, Tibet, and Yunnan. It was introduced by Kingdon Ward. Interestingly enough, when we were doing our collection work in Vietnam, it was actually one of the new records for Vietnam. And this particular plant here, we had a visit by Kenneth and Peter Cox down to Logan a few years back, and he recommended that the plant in your top left, we will get it named, and we've called the top one Rhododendron Logan Dream, and the bottom left Rhododendron Logan Surprise. But a fantastic plant, highly scented. The leaves, are covered in this lovely rust-coloured endomentum, but just a great plant all round, Rhododendron Edgeworthii. One or two other real highlights. If I had to produce a particular favourite, Rhododendron Dalhousie varobdotum from Arunachal Pradesh. It's often, epiphytic. Flowers very late. You can almost get a rhododendron to flower every month of the year. So, for example, this one here can flower anytime between June and August. It's always very leggy, unfortunately. It's a little bit like Rhododendron lindleyi, but it's got a lovely peeling bark, and it never fails to attract comment. I always think it's like a Lilium longiflorum with a stripe of lipstick down the side. Rhododendron Genisterianum, this is a fairly recent introduction from Vietnam. We made quite a number of collections of that. It's one of the most vigorous rhododendrons you can get. It's highly scented. It either comes in white or whitish pink, but it's a fantastic plant. And the bottom two are Rhododendron madani. And Rhododendron madani hails from Tibet, Yunnan, and Burma. It's generally terrestrial, which many Medinias aren't. It's very highly scented, but it's a really good plant. This one here, and it is varying degrees of hardiness. And what I would say is that the smaller the leaf of the Medinia, generally the hardier it is. Rhododendron camellia is quite an unusual rhododendron. It's not amazing for its flowers, but it's an interesting plant. It's often epiphytic. It hails from eastern Nepal and Bhutan. It has a lovely peeling bark, which is mahogany coloured. You can get it in white, pink, or purple. Reasonably hardy, and in the wild you'll often see it growing in the crux of a tree. It's a nice plant, and it flowers quite late, so it's quite useful for its late flowering. Rhododendron falconeri. Again, we generally tend to grow this one from seed from Bhutan and Arunachal Pradesh. Magnificent foliage. I mean, just from the plant itself, lovely endomentum on the underside, and then it gets covered in these enormous trusses of whitish flowers. It's generally very slow from seed. I haven't mentioned grafting tonight, but it's a good plant to be grafted, this particular one here. But one of the real quality big leafers. An unusual rhododendron. Many of you will have heard of Virrea rhododendrons. This is a pseudo-Virrea rhododendron, and many of these come from northern Vietnam. This is rhododendron from Taiwan, actually. This is Rhododendron Camellia, but from northern Vietnam, plants such as Rhododendron emarginatum, Rhododendron sororium. There's a whole host of them. An unusual thing about these rhododendrons is that they often flower in the autumn. Generally epiphytic. They grow well on, for example, on the bark of tree ferns, and generally most of them are hardy to about -7, -8. Rhododendron quayi. This was labelled at Logan as Rhododendron quayi. Talking to Ken Cox, he actually thinks it's a hybrid between Rhododendron quayi and Auriculatum, which flower at the same time. Either way, it's a great plant. It flowers in August. Again, there aren't too many flowers of rhododendrons in August, so it's a great plant to have. But Rhododendron quayi, hails again from Burma, Yunnan, and northern Vietnam. It's very rarely seen in gardens, and it grows up to about 7 meters tall. But it's a really good plant. One of the other advantages of growing plants from seed is when you grow plants from seed, you don't sometimes know what you can get, or you get some forms which are amazing and other forms which are just mediocre. Whereas with cuttings, you know exactly what you're going to get. And this was a seedling which which I grew in my own garden. And on my wife's 40th birthday, I let her know that I was going to name a rhododendron after her. And it's just about to flower in the garden at the moment. This is Rhododendron Baines. I'm not sure I think there's a little bit of Oreodoxa in it, but it's a great plant. It's like a strawberry color. Whereas the one on the right-hand side, Rhododendron hodgsoni, this particular plant here, this is you can't really grow it from cuttings very easy. This is one which I sowed from seed in 1985, and I think it flowered for the first time in the year 2000. Very slow from seed. With some rhododendrons, you just need to have masses of patience, but it is worth it in the long run. And then you get a year like this year where you get frost after frost. But who knows? Hopefully next year will be a good flowering year. Just coming towards the end now, but just one or two other nice rhododendrons. With all these, for example, cultivars such as Rhododendron Parker Smith, we obviously can't propagate those from seed. else we'll get something quite different. Rhododendron Crysa Manicum, which is a natural hybrid between Chrysoderon and Manicum. Again, good from cuttings. Rhododendron Rothschildii, one of the big leafers. Again, very difficult from cuttings, good from seed. So if you're growing it from seed, self-pollinate it. And on the right-hand side there, you've got Rhododendron Casoense, a very unusual one, autumn flowering, soft butter yellow flowers, which flowers in the autumn. It requires very good drainage, but quite an unusual plant, and just usually a quite good plant for the collector. So one or two others which are just flowering, which have been flowering in recent weeks. Rhododendron sequoiense, quite difficult to grow. Some people say the best way to grow it is in a hanging basket. I grow it in more as a frost-free greenhouse, which is good. Rhododendron consinoides, again, another autumn flowering one, often epiphytic, rarely grown, but is well worthy of it and probably good for hybridizing. The bottom left, Rhododendron carneum, which is a really showy plant and should be grown a lot more widely. That's often come through -6, -8, which is a really good strong plant. And on the right hand side from Thailand, Rhododendron Ludwigianum, lovely plant, and should be grown much more widely. And just to finish off the last slide, this was a rhododendron which we saw in northern Vietnam. We think it's a new species, either Argyrophylla or subspecies Thaliensia. We've got young seedlings of it. I've just recently been sent pictures of it in flower, got bright pinky purple flowers. It'll probably take, 6, 8, 10 years to flower. So hopefully this is one of the ones in years to come, which we'll name in conjunction with our partners at IEBR in Hanoi, with the work which we're doing jointly out there. But it's great to see that, there are still rhododendrons to be, found, which are new to science. And again, one of the methods which I've mentioned, growing these young seedlings from seed and maintaining genetic diversity. So hopefully that gives you an overview, a very brief overview of rhododendron propagation, opens your eyes to the different methods which are available. What may work for one plant might not work for another, but just wish you good luck and thanks very much for listening. Thank you.
Hello again, and thank you so much for that, Richard. It was fantastic, such a practical overview and a lot of inspiration as well, a lot of ideas there. And so I'm delighted to have Seamus O'Brien with us, and we're going to also add, I think, Mary and Matthew to the screen and have a little bit of a discussion, look at the questions together. So how does this compare with Kilmacurragh and cultivation of rhododendrons, Seamus?
Well, Richard probably grows a completely, well, not quite a completely different range, I would say, Richard. We traditionally have grown a lot of the sort of the, what you call big house rhododendrons, the Grandias, the Falconeras, and so on. Actually, Richard, I really liked your white flowered Falconeri.
Yeah.
I've seen it in the wild, and, Matthew showed it in his lecture yesterday. And when I first saw Fitch's plate and saw white, I thought he got that wrong until we trekked up Tonglu on the Nepalese border of Sikkim and saw the white flowered form. So I'm just wondering what's the provenance of your white Falconeri?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure.
Sorry, awkward question.
No, it's fine. I could certainly find out for you. Yeah, it is quite unusual to see such a pale form of it like that. But I think now it is actually wild collected, so I can find that out for you. But yeah, it's a good, I mean, just from the foliage point of view, it actually looks quite an aristocratic plant, actually just looking at it, and for the foliage and the bark. And it's just a great plant all in all, but quite slow.
Yeah, lovely plant. Richard, I know that we're going to get loads of questions because I see actually there are questions piling up in the background. But can I kickstart questions this evening, if you don't mind? So you've propagated your rhododendrons from seed. You've got frames of rhododendrons. How at Logan do you control vine weevil from getting into your collection? And do you find that certain subsections are more prone? I find trifloras are really, really susceptible. So what are you using at Logan to control vine weevil?
Yeah, we use a natural predator. I'm just trying to think what it is. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. But we use it as a soil drench. But what we try and do at Logan is, because we've got very, very little vine weevil in the garden, whenever we see it, we basically dispose of a plant, and we've got very, very little of it, and it hasn't been a problem. So we had a couple of, I think it was Streptocarpus and a couple of primulas last year, which we had it on. But to date, with the rhododendrons, touch wood, we haven't actually had any of it, which is great. At my home here, I had a bit of a problem a few years ago, and I went through everything. Everything was either black or white. And if it had vine weevil, it was tossed out. And again, I use a good drench, and we've really got on top of it, which is great. And outside in the garden is very little. So fortunately to date, Seamus, we're pretty good. So I can't really comment on which particular subsections are more.
Well done. You're one of the lucky ones.
Well, lucky, and long may it continue.
Yeah, good news. Yeah, I know in the Edinburgh Botanic Gardens, they're very stringent with their quarantine, and it's something that they do a lot of research on as well, which is good.
Yeah, one of the things we have done at Logan in recent years is, for any plant coming into the garden, we've got an isolation house, and it spends, between 3 and 12 months there, which is really helping us, to try and identify, because there are quite a number, that golden mealybug, which is doing the rounds, is an absolute horrendous beast, so if we can actually isolate it, so much the better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Great. So Mary has joined us as well from Kilmacurragh. So Seamus is the head gardener in Kilmacurragh, and Mary is the head guide. So we have two Kilmacurragh representatives with us, which is fantastic.
Hi, Richard.
Hello.
Hello, Seamus. Hello again.
Mary. Hi there.
I only saw you an hour ago. Richard, I loved your talk. I absolutely adored it, because there's something, I just love growing things from seed. But what I think is really important, with Rhododendron Week, what we're trying to create is greater awareness of this, of the genus Rhododendron. But what I loved was, how you can grow so much through so many seasons. And one of my favorites is Auriculatum. And I love the time that it
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so thank you so much for showing, how long a season that rhododendrons will go on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Rhododendrons often get bad press. People always think, when they think of rhododendrons, they always think about Rhododendron ponticum. That's one of 1,200 or so different species. And then the other common comment you get is, oh, they always look great for 2 or 3 weeks in spring, and then there's nothing left. But there's so many, you can actually get rhododendrons to flower every month of the year. It's just about educating people and, getting out there and doing more work to find out what's available.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. Unfortunately,
sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Charlotte. When you were going to say about ponticum, I'm sure Seamus, you would like probably better to come in here if you want, because.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I remember on my very first ever expedition to China, which was 1996. Doing an interview with Rhodiodendron, and anybody who knows Ireland knows that Kerry is, and the west coast of Ireland, west coast of Scotland as well, has major problems with Rhododendron ponticum. But Richard, you've just stated, actually, what I'm about to state is that there's 1,200 species out there. A few of them very gently self-seed, only in a garden situation. You'll always get a few seedlings of Rhododendron luteum, but the rhododendron that is sort of called ponticum, it's actually a hybrid. It's a man-made hybrid. It should have, without human intervention, it would never have originated. And it's a cross between Rhododendron, the true Rhododendron ponticum. There's a bit of Rhododendron maximum in there. There's a bit of Rhododendron quaterbiense in there. And it's got massive hybrid vigor. It's a real rogue. And it's unfortunate that one man-made hybrid has given such a wonderful genus of well-behaved plants a really good name. I know that we've had a couple of inquiries about why are we celebrating rhododendrons when they're taking over the west of Ireland in Connemara. So for anybody who is concerned and anybody who's listening in there tonight, what we're celebrating are the species and hybrids that actually are well behaved in our gardens. And there's only one man-made hybrid that has given the genus a very bad name. So it's the rotten egg and the rotten apple in the group, and it's something that was created in gardens. It doesn't exist in the wild. So I mean, I will always fly the flag for rhododendrons. They're wonderful plants and they're well-behaved plants.
Exactly. So this is very well timed in that sense, and that we're increasing the awareness. So it's good.
Yeah. Just before we take questions, can I just mention as well that Richard, if you can see this, is this looking backwards maybe? But anyway, this is Richard's book, Plant Explorer, published but just recently, Richard. Is that right?
Yeah, published in December. Yeah, December.
Yeah, so this is Richard's account of his travels in Vietnam. It's a wonderful read, full of not just rhododendrons, lots of other plants, but it includes a lot of his new discoveries from Vietnam. And actually, Richard, it's going to be very exciting visiting Logan and seeing some of your newly discovered species. I'm sure for you raising them from seed at the moment and waiting for them to reach flowering stage for the very first time outside Vietnam. That must be very exciting for you.
Yeah, it's quite amazing. I mean, ourselves and there's one or two other collectors, have been doing, work in Vietnam, and there was, for example, a plant of the rhododendron, or a plant that looks very similar to Rhododendron triflorum, with yellow flowers. And is it a triflora?
Oh.
Is it a Medenia? And there's such a lot of discussion, It's very exciting. All these things, you need a lot of patience. The Viagra Italiensia might take 8 years to flower. We've got lovely specimens, which are growing on at the moment. It takes quite a while publishing it, getting the actual description spot on. It's a waiting game, but it's really vital work. Some of these species have very fragile, small populations. And if we don't collect them, grow them on in ex situ situations, these plants will be lost and never seen again. So the work at Kilmacurragh, Logan, Glasnevin, the Botanics in Edinburgh is absolutely vital. You can't conserve what you don't know is there.
Exactly. It's not just horticulture, it's conservation as well.
Yeah. Without hogging too much more of your time, Richard, because I know there's other people waiting to ask questions, can I just ask one more question? What's the most horticulturally worthy and horticulturally exciting rhododendron that you've recently introduced from your travels in Vietnam?
Oh, that's a difficult question, but there's probably one, and I was planting some at the weekend actually. Rhododendron sullivanense. Rhododendron sullivanense is a fairly new introduction, and it's one of these big leafers. And it sailed. We had -9 here during the winter, and it absolutely sailed it no problem. It flowers fairly young as a plant. I've got Alan Clark introductions, which I was planting out, and I think they're something like 8 years old, and they flowered for the first time this year. But Rhododendron sullivanense has giant leaves, lovely big imperial-like flowers. A real regal plant, a lot faster to flower than a lot of the other big leafers. But Rhododendron sullivanense would be my guess. Okay,
and actually, I see in your book, Richard, if our viewers can see this, can you see that? So there's Richard with the same rhododendron on the inner cover of his book. So pretty big leaves. It is impressive, I must say.
Yeah, a really nice plant, great plant to grow, and hopefully in gardens we'll see that more and more in coming years.
Fantastic.
Just one thing, Richard. Logan's Dream.
Logan Dream.
Yeah, is that available in commercial horticulture?
So that was originally collected by David Knott, the curator in Edinburgh, in a private garden. So it's not wild collected, so we can multiply it and sell it. So what we've been doing, we've been micro-propagate, and at the moment I think we've got something like 2,000 young plants.
Wow.
So it will be available very shortly, because it's absolutely incredible. I mean, the colour, the actual calyx being pink, and it's reasonably hardy, but just a stunning plant. So yeah, we should have that for sale in coming years. Yeah, Logan Dream and Logan Surprise.
Love that.
Hopefully Brexit doesn't make that difficult for those of us outside the UK.
Yeah, if only, yeah, Seamus, that's what I'll say. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Thanks. Seamus, are you going to go with the questions?
Yes, actually. Now,
Sorry.
I am going to look back. Yeah, so we've got a question from Jared. And what is the best time for air layering?
If I was air layering, I'd probably air layer during September. It's in the autumn and it's got all winter and the following growing season. So you normally air layer in the autumn. So September is probably the best month for you to do it.
Fantastic. I see another question here as well, Richard. You talked about January and January cuttings for some of the larger species. So how long would it take to root some of those species, and what would those species be?
Yeah, so some of the larger species, can take anything up to 6, 8, 9 months to root, sometimes. But they've actually found on some of the species, like even, for example, things like Rex. I'm just trying to think of any other big leafers. Rothschildii, but you can actually root. They're very, very difficult. But in general terms, anything with a sort of fairly large leaf, anything like Serotinum, any of those quite big leaves, Galactinum, they respond very well to cuttings in December, January time. So if in doubt with the really difficult ones, I mean, things, like Fulconii are almost impossible. I mean, you can sometimes get roots on them, but the really difficult ones, certainly December, January time, it's worth giving them a go. Certainly we did some this last year, and they do take a long time, but you'll get quite good results.
Great. So Richard, also as well, if somebody wants to take for example your white flowered falconeri, and you want to get that lovely white flowered form, or if you've got a very good yellow form, we'll say, of Maccabianum, and you want to sort of self-pollinate that plant so that the seed is absolutely true. Could you just tell us a little bit, if you were at Logan, how you would do that?
Yep. So what I would do, I'd probably use a cotton bud and wait till probably the day before the flower opens, so that there's no promiscuity going about. Get your cotton bud and carefully get the pollen from one unopened flower and transfer it to another unopened flower. And then thereafter, you can just, from the plant which you've transferred the pollen to, remove the petals and just cover it with a bag so it doesn't receive any other pollen from any other plant to emasculate the plant. So the bag should be something sort of cotton, and then just tie it with a little bit of thread, and then eventually your seed will form, which will be absolutely true to type.
Great. Which is important if you've got, superior forms, because very often if you look at something like Rhododendron Maccabianum, you can get very, very, very good primrose yellows, and then you can get some absolutely mundane forms. So that would be important. Do you do grafting, Richard?
We don't do grafting. We're probably going to do grafting in years to come, but at the moment we don't. It's such a specialized thing. Using hot pipes and various things, and you need a lot of rootstocks, etc. So we haven't done grafting yet, but certainly in years to come we would like to do that. Yeah, it ties in. If you're going to conserve a species, you need a decent amount of them. 2 or 3, isn't really enough. If we're really serious, like we've done with the Conifer Conservation Project, botanic gardens need to up their numbers.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's just one other interesting thing in there, both I suppose for Richard and Seamus. Some people are, they may have old specimens in their home gardens, and about cutting them back. What recommendations would you have?
Okay, well, I'll give one tip, and Richard, if you want to follow in then after me. There is a sort of a rule of thumb that if you're looking at rhododendrons, if they're smooth bark species, so say something like barbatum, you just do formative pruning. You cannot hard prune something like rhododendron barbatum, because there are no dormant buds hidden beneath a sort of a bark layer. Whereas if you look at something that has a very flaky bark, and a classic example, if you take our rhododendron alta Clarence on the Broadwalk, 2 years after we bought the estate, rather that Glasnevin, took it over as a satellite garden, we had a really bad luck that a hurricane ran through the garden. So we had Victorian rhododendrons tore down to ground level. But with these sort of flaky barked species and hybrids, they very often have dormant buds underneath there. So you actually can prune them quite hard. And for some species, actually, it improves them. And I know that Charles Williams at Carhays in Cornwall, he'll tell you it actually prolongs the longevity of those plants as well. So in general, the rule of thumb is that it's got a very smooth bark, it's just formative pruning. But if it's got a sort of a flaky bark, actually, you can do some fairly harsh pruning on it as well. But at that, take it back a stem at a time. Don't just whack the whole thing back at once, do it gradually. Richard, what's your take on
that? Continuing on from there, I would say any of the large leaf species, avoid them with a barge pole. Any of your Falconera, Grandia subsections, avoid those. Any of the hardy hybrids, whether they're 5, 10, 15 feet tall, any hardy hybrids will generally come, and respond well to pruning. So if you know it's a species, got a big leaf, avoid pruning it. If it's a hardy hybrid, pretty vigorous, you can go down, chop it down as Seamus says. You'll get a much better plant, much bushier plant, and don't be frightened to chop it off one branch at a time, and just take your time and know what you're pruning. Because if you do prune these big Grandias or Falconeras, you don't get a second chance.
Yeah, and with azaleas as well, recommendations there, because there is a question in, somebody has an old specimen, I think 20 years old, of an azalea. So by cutting that back, I think it's one of the last towards the end there, Seamus.
Okay.
Can you cut back azaleas? Mine is over 20 years and getting too big where I have it in the garden. So we don't say what a type or what it is. So azaleas then is, what do you recommend there?
Well, many of the deciduous azaleas, things like Rhododendron luteum and that, will respond. You can more or less cut them down to ground level and they'll shoot away. I don't actually have experience of a lot of the sort of American species, but quite a few of them are pretty vigorous. And I think will probably respond in the same way as luteum does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Especially the Ghent and the Exbury hybrids. I know that at Ansgrove, which is an OPW property which we're restoring at the moment. So the staff there gave these were deciduous azaleas planted in the 30s and 40s by Richard Grove Ansley, and they were cut back by a fair whack, given a nice mulch underneath just to kind of feed them, and they responded very, very well to it, really well to it. It does help.
Okay, there was also something, I think you might have mentioned to me recently, Seamus, about growing in coir. Somebody's asking about good alternatives for peat. Was there some grower who was growing on coir? UCOIR?
Yes, yeah. I know that a lot of or some growers, it's funny, if you look at some commercial growers, they prefer to grow in field-lined nurseries. So I know Poxes at Glendyke will prefer to grow in soil. I know that David Millay down in Farnham in Surrey, he will use peat alternatives as well. Yeah, so everybody has a different take. I think Chris Loader is using a sort of a mix, and it depends from species to species. I know we should be phasing out peat, but it is unfortunate that the best growing medium for rhododendrons is peat. And really, for seed raising, actually, it's very difficult to find something that you better for germinating rhododendrons on. But of course, we do need to be looking at peat alternatives.
Yeah, one of the things we're actually looking at Logan at the moment is, obviously we've had a cold winter, and every time we get a cold winter, our Blechnum chilense gets absolutely killed off, and we've got to cut it all down to ground level. So we're looking at composting all the old fronds, and it makes a beautiful leaf mold. And probably years to come, we'll actually use that, which is much more sustainable.
A bit like they would have used Osmunda in Victorian times. Okay. Richard, just another question I'm looking at here. So we've seen the process of propagation of rhododendrons at Logan, but as we know, within the Royal Botanic Gardens of Scotland, there's the Inverleith site, there's Dyke, there's Benmore. So how do the three other sites that make up the National Botanic Gardens of Scotland, how are they propagating their rhododendrons, and what's the different focus of rhododendrons on each of the sites that make up the Royal Botanic Gardens of Edinburgh?
Excellent question, Seamus. So one institution with 4 different gardens and 1 collection. So Edinburgh is the main garden, and that focuses on the rare rhododendrons, which are indoors, and probably the biggest collection of general outdoor rhododendrons. Then we have Dyke, which is located in Peebles, just near Peebles, which has a very cold, almost continental climate, quite dry. And here you'll find lots of the hardier species, things like Rhododendron Oreodoxa. And then on the west coast, you've got Benmore, which is incredibly wet. And here you see lots of the very sort of moisture-loving plants, from general China. This is probably one of our biggest collections as well. Loads of different species here, but all requiring lots of moisture, but not the most tender ones. The most tender ones are grown down at Logan because of its particularly mild climate. Down at Logan, we generally get down to about -2, -3. This year we've had -6, which is particularly cold, but all the rhododendrons are okay. Each of the gardens has particular subsections which it concentrates on. So, for example, Logan's would be Edgeworthia, Medinia, Pseudovireas. So we're working to the strengths of each individual garden and which plants do particularly well. So although we've got 4 gardens, it's 1 collection.
Yeah. And it's funny, what I find most impressive about all the 4 gardens is that when you walk through, there's the labels, but you can see that there are original George Forrest, Joseph Rock, Frank Higgin Ward, all of the original collectors. Like Edinburgh, probably of all the gardens around the world, has done the most to preserve the collections of the early plant collectors that were based out in Burma and based out in China. It really is very impressive, the conservation work that Edinburgh does.
Yeah, it is fantastic, and some of the plants, which come to Logan are direct descendants, of George Forrest collections. There could be recent cuttings, for example, from the Edinburgh collection, which have been transferred to Logan. And there's just such history there, the conditions which some of these famous plant collectors endured, with leeches and almost taken, almost potentially murdered and falling into traps and eating bee larvae. Seamus will know firsthand all about this. But we owe a lot, of gratitude to these individual collectors, for the work which they did and the pain, and the actual, the fantastic notes which we kept, which we still have today. So there's a lot of history. There's much more to it than the actual plant. The label is just a wealth of information. It's like opening a book.
But actually, Richard, isn't it fantastic that they left something behind, that you can walk into the hills and mountains of northern Vietnam and discover new species of rhododendrons there in the 21st century, and have the excitement of watching these plants grow in Edinburgh and Logan, and hopefully seeing them flower over the next couple of years. It is great that the great plant hunters didn't get everywhere, that they left some corners of the world to us in the 21st century.
Yeah, it is. And I remember the first time I mentioned about going to northern Vietnam, the individual who I told it to, I said I want to go to northern Vietnam to collect plants for Logan, and he looked at me almost as if I had horns on my head. Why do you want to go to northern Vietnam? And then the penny dropped because of it being very mountainous and a similar climate to Logan. But, one of the real things about, modern day plant exploration is about collecting plants. But why are we collecting these plants? We're collecting them not to make money, but to preserve the longevity, work with our host country to preserve their flora for future generations, to save it and to do our bit. We often have the expertise, we've got the money in the West, but let's work with partners, all around the globe and do our bit. And hopefully, for example, some of these plants which are disappearing, like, for example, Rhododendron Camellia, who knows, in the future there may be opportunities, like we've done with some other plants, to repatriate that, again, with the host country. So there's a great lot of work we can do, but hopefully let's do something which future generations can thank us for.
Great. And Richard, my last question to you is, isn't it true that the founder of Logan was one of the founding members of the Rhododendron Society, which, as we say, morphed into the Rhododendron Camellia Magnolia group?
Yeah, I think Kenneth McDowell was one of the founding members. Him and I think the chap, another garden quite close by, over at Monreith, I think was one of them.
Oh,
and,
Sir Herbert Maxwell.
Sir Herbert Maxwell, yeah, and Castle Kennedy just down the other direction, and Cahays. So we've got a lot of history and a lot, to thank these people who had the foresight, just to see the potential, what they're doing.
And the legacy develop, because I know that one of our viewers this evening is Avril Milligan, one of the former head gardeners of Rowan in County Down, and here in Ireland, the founding members, as you'll see from the video that Mark Rubin and Wendelin Morrison created. I think it's went up on our website today, Mary, is that right?
Yeah.
So that included people here in Ireland like Sir Frederick Moore at Glasnevin, Hugh Armitage Moore at Rowan, Sir John Ross of Bladensburg, who was chief of the Dublin Metropolitan Police. These were the sort of characters, along with Ken McDowell at Logan, that formed, actually, what has to be said, it was a very, very, very exclusive club of sort of socially equal, very wealthy people, but at the same time, look at the legacy that they've left behind.
Yeah, Charlotte, I think you have it up on other social media sites as well, don't you?
Yeah, it's on our YouTube channel. So Ciara has shared a link there in the chat for anyone who's looking for it to our YouTube channel. So it has all the videos, and it will have this video as well when this talk is complete as well.
Yeah. And for anybody who's not a member, Richard, I know that you're a member, and Mary as well. The Royal Horticultural Society, they do have various different sort of semi-autonomous groups, and sort of the one that we're very keen on and that we're all members of is the Rhododendron Camellia Magnolia group, which promotes all the three genera. And of course, what we're doing from Kilmacurragh this year is promoting rhododendrons, which is going to become an annual event from here. And we're really pleased to have our very first keynote external speaker is Richard, because Richard, I know you a good few years now, but you sprang automatically to mind as our external speaker, because you're probably one of the most hands-on curator I know. Very often a curator comes out with a shirt and tie. I normally meet you at Logan with a wheelbarrow and a fork in hand. So, and
old habits die hard.
Exactly, but it really is good to have someone like you who's just so hands-on in the garden, telling us your experience of raising rhododendrons from seed.
Yeah, and can I just say, Richard, just the way you described the gardens in Scotland, when we get out of COVID, it will be a real go-to place, I think, now for a lot of us to see those gardens. So thank you.
My pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you again. And just to say, there is a poll, and I've been looking forward to delving in there. So Richard came up with quite a devious question. So we might take a look at that now and see the results.
Right.
So the question was, which rhododendron is the odd one out? So, we'll tell you which one, and then maybe you can say if you know why in the comments, perhaps. So Rhododendron Edgeworthii, which got the most votes, actually. Rhododendron Sinogrande, Rhododendron Scopolorum, Rhododendron Serotinum, or Rhododendron Crenulatum. So Richard, would you like to announce?
Yep. And the answer is Rhododendron Crenulatum, which is a true nonconformist. Out of the 1,200 different species, it's the only species which doesn't have an entire leaf margin. It's got a crenulate leaf margin, and hence the name Crenulatum. Sorry for it being so challenging and difficult.
Well, actually, Richard, had anybody read this great book, they would have answered that question automatically.
A few votes. I got 3 votes, so 3 people knew that, which is great. And now we all know.
Excellent.
To look out for now. So we should probably wrap up, but there is one more question that came in, and I feel maybe it's worth putting to you. So it's another very practical one. What causes fully rooted cuttings to then suffer from fatal stem rot? Is there a fungicide to stop this happening? Sorry. So I just thought that's hopefully.
Yeah, it's not something which happens very commonly. I would say that it's probably caused by excess water and excess waterlogging, probably a reflection of the type of compost which is used. If you can probably use probably a better drained compost and maybe work some perlite into it, that would certainly help. Water your plants in the morning rather than at night time, and probably put on extra ventilation. All these things will help. I'm not sure if there are any particular fungicides which are available. It's certainly not a common. It shouldn't be a common thing unless. Have you heard of it before, Seamus? It's not something I've.
No, I haven't come across that before, Richard.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's commonly come across it. Occasionally, but increasing, ventilation, a little bit of perlite, additional perlite in the.
Yeah, good advice rather than going straight to the fungicide for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. We're more raising rhododendrons here from seed than we are from cuttings. So, sort of working with species. So, Mary, before we sort of say our sort of formal thank you to Richard, do you want to talk about the remainder of Rhododendron Week and what's happening?
Yes, tomorrow, Seamus, we have a very special talk featuring Seamus.
No, I wasn't plugging myself out.
No, you weren't.
There's more than me.
Yeah, and as you say, we have the wonderful video story up today about the history of the RHS Rhododendron Camellia Magnolia group. And so we have something very special coming on Saturday, which is a video story on, I suppose we'd call it basic taxonomy, but it is absolute. I was lucky enough to see it first, Seamus. I was there when you were filming it, and it is so good. So I really can't but recommend that. And then that's on Saturday, so that's a video story that'll be released hopefully after 12 noon onto the YouTube channel, Charlotte, as well, and Facebook and everything. But then wrapping up on Sunday is another video story. And I think what you were saying, Richard, with regard to conservation, Seamus and Matthew will be talking about that, and it's great that you've kind of brought that to the fore tonight. So that will be our last wrap up, we can call it, for Rhododendron Week this year, and I suppose we'll be just looking to the future for further Rhododendron Weeks.
Right.
And Seamus, sorry, I loved, as I say, out of COVID and everything, and Richard, you've given us, we're all dying to travel somewhere, we really, really are. But Seamus is bringing us on a gorgeous adventure to Sikkim on Friday, aren't you, Seamus? Yeah,
so we'll, it's the 2015 trip. So of the sort of the 4 recent trips to Sikkim, our May 2015 trip, it was April, May, taking us from Darjeeling, looking at things like Rhododendron dalhousie. Richard, you showed the Varabdotum. So looking at everything from sort of Rhododendron dalhousie, then traveling across to Tonglu. Matthew showed slides of it, Marianne North's image. So Tonglu is a mountain that straddles the border with Darjeeling district and Nepal. So looking at things like Rhododendron Genosturianum, and then traveling up the interior valleys towards the Tibetan border, looking at a sort of spectacular species like Rhododendron niveum. And actually, Richard, Rhododendron Camellia in its wild native habitat as well. So it's a very gentle talk. It takes in a bit of history, but it takes in, we were very, very lucky because it is a sort of the pre-monsoon season, but it was a bit of the luck of the Irish. We went up the Tibetan frontier valleys, and the mountains should have been absolutely hidden in mist, but we got very, very lucky. You could very clearly see the mountains in the background. It's not just rhododendrons, it also is looking at some of the magnolias, looking at some of the perennials like cardioprinums, trilliums, bryocarpum, and so on, and some plants that are just so tricky in cultivation that the only place you'll ever see them is in the wilds of Sikkim. So it takes us sort of from Matthew's talk, looking at these plants in the herbarium, looking at them in the rare book room at Glasnevin through Hooker's publication. So this is seeing the same plants in the flesh, including actually looking at these gorgeous white flowered forms of of Rhododendron falconeri. So Richard, you stole my thunder a little bit this evening. So I'm looking forward to giving that talk tomorrow.
But I suppose, Seamus, just one thing about Rhododendron Week, it's all about education and awareness. And I think, Richard, your talk tonight, and Charlotte, you'll probably confirm that this will be recorded.
Yes,
and it will be available, because I just think it was so educational, so informative. And a lot of people who weren't able to join us tonight will be able to look back and enjoy your talk again. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Yeah.
Right.
And we look forward to hearing more from you as well.
And hopefully we'll see you over here next year for Rhododendron Week, Richard.
I'll make a point of coming, don't you worry. Seamus has got a good malt lined up.
Well, Richard, actually, when you do come, we grow a lot of your plants. And actually, in our chili ravine, every time I pass Blechnum cycadifolium, I think of you and Logan, because it's turning into cracking great plants now at this stage.
Yeah, no, it's a great plant. Yeah. And that's what horticulture is all about.
Absolutely.
I'll make sure he has the good malt lined up for you. Don't worry.
Very good.
Yes, a bit of Irish whiskey.
Yeah.
I'll have some good tasting. Very good.
Great. Richard, thank you very much. Or as we say here in Ireland, Gurav Mila Mahagat.
Charlotte, thank you so much for everything tonight.
No problem, and thank you for bearing with us as we.
Thanks for all your patience, Charlotte, at the start.
Thank you, Richard. You're the one who pulled the show together. So thank you again so much. And I hope someday we get to hear more about. I'd love to see more of your pictures from Vietnam. So if you're ever doing a talk on your travels in northern.
If you want to talk, just let me know.
Yeah.
Delighted. Yeah.
Great.
Well, we'll wish you all a very good evening, and hopefully see you tomorrow night. Certainly see Seamus at least.
I hope so. Good night, everybody, and thank you.
Good night. Thank you. Over and out.